There's a lot of pressure that comes with a director being labeled as the next so-and-so. In anime, the most prestigious of comparisons would be the next Miyazaki. Some of the more frequent names include his son Goro, no pressure kid, and Makoto Shinkai, but one of the most interesting names brought up is Mamoru Hosoda, who you'll hopefully know for Summer Wars and Wolf Children. This article, for example, makes this claim because Hosoda and Miyazaki often explore similar themes, such as family ties, childhood, and the troubles with coming of age. All things considered, I think this is a surface-level comparison at best. Hosoda's work easily distinguishes itself from Miyazaki's in the way he explores what defines a family in new ways with every film. Most of Miyazaki's works do touch on family, but it's usually in the background, as the director is far more interested in themes such as pacifism and environmentalism. Hosoda, however, puts the idea of family front and center. This makes me wonder how Hosoda would have handled directing Howl's Moving Castle, which he was initially offered by Ghibli to direct. Hosoda had his own ideas on how to go about this project, but the studio wanted him to make it more Miyazaki-like, so he eventually gave up. Perhaps if he did stay on board, he would have focused more on the makeshift family Sophie joins. As for the anti-war message Miyazaki insisted on making, that probably wouldn't have been there. For this video, I decided to take a look at 4 of Hosoda's films that best exemplify the theme of family in a major way. Summer Wars, Wolf Children, The Boy and the Beast, and Mirai. Alright, first up! The story here follows Kenji, a math genius who spends most of his time in the online VR world of Oz as one of its lower-ranking moderators. He's asked by one of his classmates, Natsuki, to accompany her to her grandmother's house to celebrate her 90th birthday. When they arrive, he realizes why he's been brought along. He's supposed to be Natsuki's fiancé. Things go well at first as Kenji is introduced to her colorful extended family. It doesn't take long until trouble shows up in the form of a computer virus named Love Machine, such an American name, which takes over Oz that wreaks havoc on the virtual world and the real world. Oh, and Kenji becomes the prime suspect for having created it. Shouldn't have replied to some random email he got, huh? But in order to stop the entirety of Japan from going under, Kenji will have to work with Natsuki and her family to stop Love Machine. Coming out 3 years after The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Summer Wars also marks the point where Hosoda's films began to take on a more personal aspect to them. After Girl Who Leapt Through Time wrapped production, Hosoda got married. And what does marriage bring? In-laws, of course! Hosoda was quickly flushed with several new family members. The weird feeling was probably not helped by the fact he mostly worked by himself as an animator and was an only child. Poor guy. In an interview, Hosoda mentioned that he was really struck by how those interpersonal relationships work. New family members are hard to deal with, but you can also make a very deep connection with a total stranger. I never really thought about the idea of family being the theme of a film before, but somehow it just clicked into place. I won't beat around the bush here. Summer Wars is my favorite film of the bunch, and probably one of my favorite movies ever. Watching the film genuinely feels like you're attending a family reunion, and not the boring kind. Every family member has a distinct personality and is quickly recognizable. They're not just boring sponges that Kenji or Natsuki need to lighten up. They have their careers and ambitions, pros and cons, and it all just feels real. Hosoda understands that even if they are often combative with one another, everyone in a family needs to work together for everyone to succeed. Not to mention, how often in anime films or shows do you see such an enormous and loving family? It seems that most of the time families are fairly small units, 1 or 2 children, the grandparents, maybe a cousin or 2, and that's it. It's refreshing to see so many people love and appreciate one another and help each other to achieve a greater goal. It makes you really want to have that same kind of experience, because I sure didn't growing up. What makes Summer Wars hit different is that it's a very optimistic film that believes family members across several generations will still be able to communicate and appreciate one another despite generational change and personal conflicts. Now, if I really wanted to be nitpicky, I would say that the whole internet war does tend to overwhelm the rest of the story's themes. But to be fair, something needed to get the plot moving forward. Without it, I mean, it's just a few weeks with an extended family. Don't get me wrong, it's not boring at all, but a little conflict doesn't hurt. Honestly, I could keep on talking about this film, but there's 3 other films I need to cover. I'm sure in the future this could be the subject of its own video. And it will. So let's skip 3 years and talk about Wolf Children! Thanks to the critical and commercial success of Summer Wars, Hosoda was able to create Studio Chizu and expand on the theme of family. The first of these films was Wolf Children, which explores a relationship between a mother and her children. The story follows Hana, a young widowed mother, and her 2 children Yuki and Ame, very creative names. Upon entering college, Hana met a mysterious man and formed a relationship with him. One day, the man revealed he was a werewolf of sort, but rather than leave, Hana decided to stay with him, and the couple have 2 children together. However, on the day she gives birth to her second child, Ame, the man is found dead while trying to get food for the family. Let me guess, it was also raining that day. Hana's attempts at being a single mother are filled with trouble. Her children constantly alternate from human form to wolf form, and it becomes increasingly difficult to hide their secret from the rest of the world. Those damn neighbors and social workers ruin everything. To keep their family together, Hana moves out to the countryside with them, and after some initial difficulties with the farming life, the three are able to settle down, and Yuki and Ame even start attending school. However, as they grow older, they'll be forced to decide what path in life they're going to take. Hosoda's inspirations for this film came from his late mother. Although she didn't raise him as a single mother, the way she raised him served as inspiration for the film. Hosoda's mother had passed away shortly after the completion of Summer Wars, and the impact of her death stayed with him. He remembered his childhood in the town of Kamichimachi in the Toyama prefecture, which closely resembles the countryside here. There was also the desire for Hosoda and his wife to have children, which was difficult given his career. Workaholic. Nevertheless, this yearning served as another form of inspiration, and sure enough, the couple would have a son just a few years later. Success. Of the 4 films, this is definitely the most emotional. There's plenty of funny and heartwarming moments here, but there's also a lot of sadness from the very beginning. Spoiler alert! When the grandmother in Summer Wars dies, it's heartbreaking for sure, but not completely devastating. All the other family members are still there to support one another, and as a result grow closer to each other. But in Wolf Children, when the father dies, we can really see the emotional toll it has on Hana. She has no one left to turn to, and she's forced to deal with so many issues all at once. The emotional resonance is helped by the fact that Wolf Children feels the most realistic of Hosoda's films. Aside from the werewolf aspect, there's not a lot of outlandish and supernatural elements at play. The characters also help out in this regard. Hana, for example, isn't the perfect mother that we might expect. She's a bit overprotective, albeit understandably so, and she's not always able to help Yuki and Ame with their issues. Again, can you blame her? She's not half-wolf. And Yuki is rambunctious and can be pretty rude. She struggles to balance life as a human with the more animalistic tendencies brought by her wolf form. As for Ame, he's the more quiet of the 3, and there's not necessarily a lot of conflict with him since he's actually a behaved child, until the very end, that is. Naturally, all of these characters come to butt heads with one another, but through all of their flaws, Hosoda is able to empathize with each of them. It's an even-handed portrayal of the struggles and joys of raising children that is often very moving. I also think the climax here is the best of the 4. It doesn't seem to just come out of nowhere so the film can end, which we'll get into soon. Very early on, it's apparent that Yuki and Ame will have to choose what path they're going to take, one where they will be more human or one where they will be closer to nature. And when that time comes, it hits hard just like it does for any parent seeing their children off. But even then, it's not outright depressing. It was something we knew was coming all along. Now, on to the next film. Hosoda carries over the idea of a surrogate family and the difficulties in raising a child, this time through the relationship of a father, a foster father, and a son. The story follows a young boy named Ren, whose mother has passed away. With his father nowhere to be found and refusing to live with his new guardians, Ren flees to Shibuya and begins to live on the streets. Meanwhile, in the Beast Kingdom, its ruler, the Grandmaster, plans to retire from his role and become a deity. That's the life. But before he does so, he needs to find a replacement and chooses 2 potential successors, Yozen and Kumatetsu. Yozen is by far the more popular of the 2. He's kind, even-tempered, a great warrior, and has 2 children of his own. Kumatetsu, on the other hand, has none of those qualities. He's fickle and pushes everyone away, but is secretly quite lonely. Kumatetsu finds Ren on the streets one day and is impressed with his willingness to fight back. So much so that he somewhat sarcastically offers Ren to be his apprentice. Since he doesn't really have anywhere to go, Ren accepts the offer. The 2 don't get along so well at first, but over time learn to work together and form a strong bond. The most striking element of Kumatetsu and Ren's relationship is the idea of children wanting to emulate their parents and how having a role model can be so helpful. The fact that Kumatetsu grew up without a role model makes it hard for him to become one for Ren, and he only changes because Ren is so vocal about his needs. As I was watching this movie, I kept remembering this idea expressed in many of Koreeda's films that children can grow up without their parents, but you cannot be a parent without children. In this regard, it makes me question who Ren thinks of as his father. Speaking of Kumatetsu, Hosoda used his own father as inspiration. He did very hard work, outside, not the kind of desk work that most of us do nowadays. He also wasn't the kind of dad who played a lot with his kids. He played the role of the old-fashioned, strong father. I wanted to get to know him better, but he died when I was around 30 years old. So it was wanting to know him more that helped me get closer to the character of Kumatetsu. I tried to imagine what it would be like if my own children were to be able to meet him somewhere in the afterlife. I don't think it'll be controversial to say that this is the weakest entry of Hosoda's works. This isn't to say that it's a bad film. The first part is very well put together. It's hilarious and touching to see the two slowly come to understand one another and realize how to fill the hole in each other's hearts. But all of the film's issues seem to come about when the film enters its second half. Ren is now 19 and struggles to figure out if he wants to stay in the Beast Kingdom or take on a new life in the human world. His relationship with Kumatetsu now feels as if it reset to the beginning of the film. The only reason that Kumatetsu does anything good here is because he is pretty much forced into doing it. It's not very realistic, if that's the right word here. To top it all off, the ending is very underwhelming. It feels incredibly rushed, as if they were thinking that the film needs to end soon, so why not just go through a quick tournament arc that feels out of place from the rest of the film? No problems here. We don't even really get a villain until this part, and when they did show up, I couldn't help but ask, why? Last but not least is
Mirai,
Hosoda's most recent film and an Academy Award nominee at that. Wow, a film nominated for an Oscar for animated feature that's not Disney? What's the world coming to? The story this time around is a little more simple. Mirai focuses on the growing bond between siblings, although the role of parents in this stage isn't completely ignored. Kun, a disorderly but still decent 4-year-old boy, or as decent as a 4-year-old boy can get, finds his world turned around when he suddenly becomes the older brother to his sister, who his parents have named Mirai. He grows increasingly upset at his parents for putting most of their attention on Mirai and starts to take it out on her. Boo-hoo, parents paying attention to a newborn.
Have you ever seen such cruelty? Ooh!
While throwing a tantrum one day, he suddenly meets a human version of his dog, Yuko, and then an older version of his sister. And that's kind of it for the story, really. Unlike the previous 3 films, Mirai is a lot more episodic in nature. Kun throws a hissy fit over some matter, whether it's due to a family member or a personal problem. He travels in time to either meet a grown-up or younger version of a family member, learns a lesson, and then is changed for the better because of it. Shortly after the release of The Boy and the Beast, Hosoda welcomed a new child, a baby girl. His son, who was 3 years old, was confused and cautious upon seeing her. He believed his younger sister was stealing his parents' love from him and started to throw temper tantrums. One of these tantrums was even recreated in the film, the one where Kun almost hits Mirai in the face with one of his toy trains. I can imagine Hosoda was upset about the whole thing, but it nonetheless inspired him to make a film about the issue. As a filmmaker, I thought there are no other movies like this, about the point of view of a 4-year-old boy with a newborn. I thought it was quite important socially to make a movie from that point of view, not just because there's nothing like it, but because it's a basic human condition. I saw it as symbolic not just for children, but for everyone. That's what the loss of love does to us all. He also included another family anecdote with Kun's great-grandfather. Hosoda's wife's great-grandfather has built warplanes and got injured during World War II. He even lived in the same city that Kun lives in, Yokohama, which serves as another layer to the film. After the war ended, Yokohama became one of the first cities in Japan to be modernized by America due to being a port city. Because the city is constantly changing, it made sense to also set the story there because Mirai is a story about how a family can change but always remain itself. When writing child characters, it's very easy to mess them up. One can easily make them too precocious or too annoying. Kun, while annoying, isn't too annoying, relatively speaking. We can understand his worries of being replaced and the challenges brought by becoming an older brother. He also learns from his mistakes and starts to realize how important family is to him. As for Kun's parents, Hosoda wanted to show their growth and how parents actually act. They can't care for their children 24/7, they have their own careers and lives they need to handle as well. Being a parent is rewarding, but still difficult. With Kun's father, for example, dozens of responsibilities are suddenly thrust on him. He's working from home as his wife returns to the office, and he's not exactly the best at handling family duties, but is thankfully not on the same level of incompetence as the idiot dad trope. It's so touching to see a father growing into the shoes of a parent, especially now that he has to take on the responsibility that was usually his wife's. The main weakness here is the fact that there's not so much story, but rather a series of episodes. Or well, whether it's a weakness or not depends on whether you like this episodic quality of Mirai or not. I personally like it, but I know that other people have issues with it. But each episode is entertaining, and all of the supporting characters are great. It gives me some Summer Wars vibes in that each family member has a pretty distinct personality and are very likable. Mirai is a cute and enjoyable entry in Hosoda's filmography. It may not be the most narratively or emotionally strong work, but it's a very entertaining one. Hey, it entertained Hosoda's children, so that should mean something at least. Who knows, maybe it'll even help solve Japan's declining birth rate problem. Even with all of their ups and downs, Hosoda's films hold a special place in my heart for showing the different ways a family can work. Although family as a theme can seem both too broad and too simplistic, Hosoda manages to explore it in a different light with every movie he makes, and in a way that people from different cultures can relate to as well. What Hosoda has accomplished is creating a universal way of showing connection and change through family. The characters are all special in their own way, but they do need others in their life nonetheless. As for me, someone who grew up not surrounded by lots of family, it made me long for having such connections too. But since I can't yet, I made y'all a video instead. Hope you enjoyed. Please watch those movies and let me know how your families are not measuring up to those perfect families Hosoda has created. Until next time!